Survive the Jive is an excellent YouTube channel that explores the origins and surviving practices of pagan Indo-European cultures, both in its unitary and diverse manifestations. It is incredibly well researched and offers fantastic visual presentation as well. A few months ago I came across a particular video Tom had created, titled A God in Disguise? Pagan Lessons in Hospitality. This video, which I highly recommend you listen to, is probably one of the most important lessons, and let's say gestures, toward the divine that we can make. In fact, that we must make, if we are to honor the gods and other humans properly. Tom recounted the ancient Greek stories of Odysseus and his relationship with Athena on his homeward-bound journey to Ithaca, along with the failed immortalization of Demophon by the goddess Demeter, recounted from the Homeric hymn to Demeter, and finally Ovid's metamorphosis story of Zeus and Hermes appearing under disguise as strangers at the modest home of Philemon and Bacchus. The traditional customs and propriety of many cultures open upon deeper pathways that reverberate into the nature of the cosmos itself. Hospitality is the theme, but today let us unveil only as much as is appropriate, and to observe the propriety that is ruled by Themis when we unveil a little bit more into the nature of this event. The most essential god in this event of hospitality, who is not mentioned directly in the video, is Apollo. In a way, his omission, whether consciously or unconsciously made, is exactly as it should be, because Apollo must always remain in the context of hospitality as an invisible and an ineffable force. This is why Empedocles never mentions Apollo by name in his poems, although he is ever present. But regardless of the human's conscious efforts or not, a god manifests himself or herself in ways that are incredibly subtle, so that when I scroll down to the bottom of the comment section of the video, I notice one that immediately hinted at something unspoken of in the video, a barely discernible presence. One commentator had mentioned that a well-known Swedish composer, Lars-Erik Larsson, had created a neo-romantic production called Förklädd Gud, or God in Disguise. Investigating this further, I found that the lyrics were composed by Hjalmar Gullberg in the 1930s, a Swedish poet steeped in the classics of the ancient world. Briefly, the poem is as follows. Who plays the shepherd's pipe in the light of early dawn, too godlike to describe, high above all we've known? Who keeps the secret, the password, the melody's hidden text? Who plays for his own herd, for animals in their nest? Who is the caring shepherd, guiding his flock up the hill? Who brings them to their pasture, playing to keep them still? Who walks among the meadows as summer heat weighs low, and sleep in the farmhands' rows on earthly straw? The context of the poem is derived from Euripides' Alcestis, where Apollo is banished from Olympus for a year to work as a shepherd among the humans. This is precisely how the gods work, in subtle presentations of themselves. As Tom himself says, they always come to man in disguises, even in YouTube comments, it would seem. This wonderful and very subtle hint brings us to the theme of hospitality and the paramount role that Apollo plays. Zeus, of course, is a definitive god of hospitality. In his aspect of Zeus Xenos, he is the protector of guests and strangers. Therefore, every homeowner must remain receptive and welcoming to the stranger guest, or xenos, whether they be the lowliest of humans or the highest of divine beings. One can never truly know the identity or the ontological essence of the stranger, because the stranger must always remain an unknown. Strangers or guests come from the outside, beyond the borders of the known world, the established cosmos. Hospitality is fundamentally an openness. It is an aperture by which the other can reanimate the same and revivify it. And there's always an ambivalent nature or an ambiguousness to the stranger, since the other can destroy, but paradoxically, through its destruction, can lay the foundation for recreation and rebirth. In his epithet as Apolloulios, There's a double play on its meaning that translates to, quote, destroyer who makes whole, the implication being that he heals by destroying and destroys by healing. Setting aside the one-sided Renaissance and perhaps even Nietzschean notion of Apollo as the god of light and rationality, we must come to understand the chthonic element of Apollo as Helios, and Helios as the midnight sun, a fundamentally deeper esoteric understanding of the full scope of his powers. Asclepius, who became the archetypal divine healer in incubation shrines across the Greco-Roman world, was a son of Apollo, and the notion of o trosas iastai, he who wounds also heals, manifests itself through this double nature of Olympian and chthonic divinity, the dark and the light transcended through conjunctio oppositorum of the divine healer, and on a higher level, the god Apollo himself. As we will see, Apollo acts as a connector god, or intermediary, so the notion of connecting the sun and the moon under the name of Asclepius, and the noonday sun and the midnight sun contained within Apollo, is the essential function of his dynamis. In the Chaldean tradition, composed by Julian the Chaldean or his son Julian the Theurgist, there is a strong connection and mutual relationship between Apollo and Hecate. The complementary powers between these two seemingly disparate deities can easily be observed when you cast your gaze again at the incubation healing shrines, where Asclepius, the son of Apollo, would appear in suppliants' dreams in the form of either a serpent, if they had a question regarding prophecy, or that of a dog, if their purpose was to descend to the depths of their being. The dog was understood to be associated with Apollo because he was an avid hunter, and also a great lover of the animal, and the dog itself was considered the representative of the souls of the dead, due perhaps to its uncanny sense of smell, which allowed it to seek out and pursue invisible paths. But let us also remember that the goddess Hecate was also fond of our four-legged friends. Hecate was the, quote, driver of the airy, earthy, and watery dogs. The acts of Hecate, similar to Apollo, fulfill the divine will of Zeus. She is also considered the cosmic soul, and acts as an intermediary principle between the sensible and intelligible worlds. Both Apollo and Hecate are gods of the liminal. Apollo and Hecate both guard entrances and roads. Hecate and Apollo fill the roads with light, he in the day, she in the night. This sense of guarding an entrance is also apparent in one of her epithets as Kleodokoi, the key-bearer, which is also the name attributed to the Tetractys, along with the number 10, which is a completion of the Tetractys, the cosmogonic unfolding. There again, we can see that both Apollo and Hecate are forces that provide the limit by not only managing the boundaries between the inside and the outside, or the limited and the unlimited, but also provide that continual establishment of the cosmos that bridges the mind, or phren, and nature, or physis. For how else could we understand or perceive the world around us if there is no connecting thread between our minds and the world? One of Apollo's many epithets is Ikatabolos, aka the far shooter. This is best illustrated by his bow and arrow, the weapon by which he slayed the monstrous python and later buried at the core of his Delphic oracle. The bow and arrow encapsulates his dynamis perfectly, through its tension of opposing forces, the drawing back of the string and arrowhead, and the forward movement of the aiming bow and hand create two opposing directions. The tension builds, but once released, propels the arrow and allows it to travel incredibly far distances at a moment's notice. Far shooter does not only imply a weapon, but a characteristic of movement. Apollo is always the god who comes from afar. The action and the effects of the archer occur at a distance and almost simultaneously in complete proximity, as the arrow pierces its target. Of course, as a god, the movement from release of bowstring to embedding arrow into target is virtually nullified. It is an action and an outcome that collapse into one single event, an event that is not really an event because it is an impossibility. But Apollo is also considered the god of impossibilities. He is an absence in presence and a presence in absence, and like Odysseus, he is the archetypal xenos, or stranger. Because he comes and acts from afar, he is that tension which exists and is represented by the stranger who is disguised and retains his anonymity. Similarly, the musicality of Apollo is highlighted as well, with his musical instrument of the lyre, which also operates in the same fashion through his dynamis of transmitter acting from afar, but this time in regard to harmonic vibration, which can be associated with the music of the spheres. This is manifested through the same string, acting through the same principles of tension. The reverberation of a string affecting the vibrations and frequency of other things in the universe can equally suggest a transmission of a will that permeates the cosmos in a particular harmonic configuration, acting in resonating sympathy with one another. Of course, Zeus is his father, and so Apollo acts as a mediator of his father's cosmic will that ensures that Zeus's reign and his cosmos continue in perpetuity. Zeus offers all creatures and gods his hospitality in this cosmic realm, and it is up to us to accept it or reject it. By inviting the stranger, the presence of Apollo who comes from afar and acts as an invisible conduit that connects the inside and the outside, and thereby dissipates the borderland or the boundary. By incorporating the stranger who is eternally outside of the frame of the cosmos, Apollo is actually re-establishing and reaffirming the cosmic order. And without cosmic order, a product of true hospitality, we fall into the endless pattern of revolution and revolt, where parents devour their children and their children supplant their parents, and so on and so forth, exemplified by the successive curse of Uranos and Kronos, the grandfather and father of Zeus. However, it is also important to remember that a stranger guest can only retain his or her position or role if the tension remains between the host and the guest. It is never fully exhausted because the cosmic order always requires an outside source of regeneration. Therefore, Apollo can never be bound or exhausted by the powers of the sanctuary or temenos. He is outside the circle of the cosmos and is always perpetually arriving as a stranger. Hence, in the hymn to Apollon, translated by Athanasicus, "But when, O Phoebus, you devoured this food for immortals, neither golden bands could hold you as you struggled, nor bonds restrain you, for their ends came loose." This is followed by, "Soon among the goddesses spoke Phoebus Apollon, my wish is to hold dear the lyre and the curved bow, and to reveal to men the unerring will of Zeus." Let us also remember Tom's retelling of the story of Philemon and Bacchus. The poor old man and woman are constantly offering hospitality to the disguised Zeus and Hermes by offering water for washing, meager bits of food, and their insufficient quantities of wine, which miraculously are refilled by the power of the visiting gods. Philemon and Bacchus then offer to sacrifice their only goose in apology for their inability to be better hosts. In this way, hospitality becomes a test that is constantly presenting itself for receptivity in space. It is at last when Zeus senses the deep hospitality of the hosts that he grants them divine favor. In Carl Gustav Jung's Red Book, it is noteworthy that Jung similarly encounters the tiny cottage of Philemon and Bacchus. In a letter dated June 7, 1955, addressed to Alice Raphael, Jung writes, quote, "When I first encountered the archetype of the old wise man, he called himself Philemon." Jung was familiar with the story of Philemon and Bacchus, but was deeply affected by Goethe's adaptation of the story in his Faust, Part 2. When Faust decides that he would like to build a city on some land where Philemon's cottage sits, he asks Mephistopheles to move the old couple. But instead of simply moving them, Mephistopheles and 3 human associates burn the cottage down with the couple still inside. In Jung's letter on June 7th, he continues to expand on his, and Western civilization's, identification with the spirit of Faust. Quote, "The simple old couple, close to the earth and aware of the gods, the complete opposite to the Superman Faust, the product of the devil." Later in the Red Book, Jung asks Philemon to teach him what he knows about the art of magic, and Philemon indeed teaches him. If you are interested, I suggest you read this section of the Red Book yourself and wrestle with it the best you can. Everything you need to know about the practice of magic is written there. Without giving anything away, you can intuit the deep hospitality that envelops the conversation between the two men. In an earlier letter to Paul Schmidt, Jung writes, quote, "I have taken over Faust as my heritage, and moreover as the advocate of Philemon and Bacchus, who, unlike Faust the Superman, are the hosts of the gods in a ruthless and god-forsaken age. In a deep way, we, along with many of our ancestors, have contributed to the Faustian debasement and will to power that seeks to pit rationalistic positivism and stultifying materialism against the forces of the divine and sacred. But as with all things, and as Jung clearly showed, we must embody the spirit of hospitality and make room for Apollo and the gods to come and sit by our tables and our hearths once again, and to reconnect the bridge through the receptivity of a welcoming and attentive theurgic host. Take care for now."